August 30th, 1945. Yokohama, Japan. The sound of boots on cobblestones woke me before dawn. American boots. I knew the rhythm. Heavy, purposeful, foreign. For weeks we'd heard they were coming. The occupation forces. The victors who would punish us for everything our country had done. My name is Keiko Tanaka. I am 28 years old, a widow, mother of a 6-year-old son named Hiroshi, and until 15 days ago, I believed the Americans would kill us all. When the enemy comes, I wrote in my diary on August 14th, the day before surrender, we must die with honor rather than face their brutality. The radio says they will show no mercy. I was wrong about everything. If you're ready for a Webihu story that will completely change what you think you know about the occupation of Japan, hit subscribe and drop a like. Comment below. What do you think happened when American soldiers arrived in Japanese homes? The truth will shock you. Now let's go back to August 30th, 1945. My house stood in what had been a middle-class neighborhood of Yokohama, before the firebombing of May 29th turned half the city to ash. Our wooden home survived, though the Sato family next door wasn't so fortunate. I still heard their screams in my dreams. My husband, Takeshi, had been a school teacher before conscription. He died at Okinawa in June, though I didn't receive official notification until July 20th. Just a brief letter. Your husband died honorably serving the emperor. No details, no body, no grave to visit. Just me, Hiroshi, and my mother-in-law, Fumiko-san, 70 years old and barely able to walk after injuring her leg during an air raid. We had nothing. Our savings were worthless. The yen had collapsed. Our rice ration was down to 2 cups per week. Hiroshi's ribs showed through his skin. Fumiko-san's cough kept us awake at night. And now the Americans were here. August 30th, 1945, 6:23 a.m. The knock came as I was boiling water for tea. Not real tea, just roasted barley that tasted like dirt. Hiroshi was still asleep on his futon. Fumiko-san sat in the corner, eyes wide with fear. Should I open it? I whispered. What choice do we have? She replied. I slid open the door. 3 American soldiers stood outside. The first thing I noticed was their size. So much taller than Japanese men. Broader, well-fed in a way that seemed obscene when we were all starving. They wore olive uniforms with patches I didn't recognize. One had red hair I'd only seen in propaganda cartoons. Another had freckles across his nose. The third was their officer. I could tell by his bearing, the way the others deferred to him. He was maybe 35, with dark hair graying at the temples and eyes that looked tired. Good morning, he said, in careful, accented Japanese. Ohayo gozaimasu. I bowed reflexively, deeply, the way we'd been taught to bow to authority. Fumiko-san struggled to her feet to bow as well. Please, the officer said quickly. No need. We're here for a housing census. May we come in? A census. Not execution, not arrest. A census. I stepped aside, heart hammering. They removed their boots at the entrance without being asked. A gesture so unexpected I nearly gasped. Americans, removing their shoes in a Japanese home. The propaganda had told us they were barbarians who didn't understand civilization. The officer pulled out a notebook and pencil. Your name? Tanaka Keiko. My voice shook. Family members? My mother-in-law, Watanabe Fumiko. My son, Tanaka Hiroshi. He is 6. The officer wrote carefully. Your husband? Dead. Okinawa. June. Something flickered across his face. Not quite sympathy, but acknowledgement. I'm sorry for your loss. I didn't know what to say. Sorry? An American officer was sorry my husband died fighting Americans. He looked around our small house. 2 rooms. Tatami mats worn thin. A handful of possessions we hadn't sold or burned for warmth. The walls were scorched from when sparks from the neighboring fire had nearly caught our roof. You own this house? He asked. Yes. My husband's family home. For 3 generations. He made a note. Then he did something that made my stomach drop. He walked to the window and measured it with a tape measure. Measured the room. Wrote down dimensions. They were calculating. Figuring out how many American soldiers could be quartered here. That's what occupying armies did. They took your homes and threw you into the street. I thought of Hiroshi, still sleeping. Where would we go? The refugee camps were overflowing. People were dying of disease and starvation by the hundreds. The officer finished his measurements and turned to me. Mrs. Tanaka, under the terms of occupation, we need to document all surviving residential structures in Yokohama. Here it came. The eviction. Your home is structurally sound. You have room for 4 people, though you currently house 3. He closed his notebook. You will continue to reside here. No Allied personnel will be billeted in occupied family homes unless absolutely necessary, and only with fair compensation. I stared at him. I can stay? Yes, ma'am. This is your home. But the propaganda said... I stopped myself. Admitting we'd been lied to felt dangerous. Even now. The officer's expression softened slightly. I imagine your propaganda said many things about us, just as ours said many things about you. He glanced at Fumiko-san, still frozen in her bowing position. Ma'am, please sit. Your leg is injured? She nodded, slowly lowering herself back down. We have medical units setting up in the city center, he said. There will be free clinics for civilians. You should have that looked at. Free clinics. For Japanese civilians. From the Americans we'd been bombing, fighting, killing for 4 years. None of this made sense. The red-haired soldier spoke quietly to the officer in English. The officer nodded and pulled something from his pack. A chocolate bar, not a full bar. It had clearly been broken and shared multiple times. But chocolate nonetheless. He held it out to me. For your son. I didn't take it. Couldn't. My hands wouldn't move. Please, he said gently. It's just chocolate. Why? The word came out as a whisper. Why would you give us anything? He was quiet for a moment. Then, because he's 6 years old, and because the war is over. The war is over. Those words. So simple. So impossible to process. The war that had consumed everything. Our food, our homes, our husbands and sons, our entire lives for 4 years. Was over, and the enemy standing in my house was offering my child chocolate. I took it with shaking hands. Thank you, I managed. The soldiers left, put their boots back on, walked down our street to the next house, continued their census. I stood in my doorway holding a piece of chocolate, watching them go, trying to understand what had just happened. Fumiko-san spoke first. They didn't hurt us. No. They let us keep the house. Yes. They took off their shoes. Yes, we looked at each other. 4 years of propaganda, of being told Americans were demons, that they would rape and murder and destroy, and they'd remove their shoes, measured our windows, given us chocolate. Keiko, Fumiko-san said slowly, I think we've been lied to about everything. September 2nd, 1945. The formal surrender was signed aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. We listened on a neighbor's radio, one of the few that hadn't been confiscated or destroyed. Emperor Hirohito's voice, thin and distant, announcing what we already knew. Japan had lost. People wept, not from grief exactly, more from release, the tension that had wound tighter and tighter for months, wondering when the invasion would come, when the bombs would fall, when we would be ordered to die defending the homeland, finally snapped. We could stop waiting to die. But we still didn't know what came next. The Americans established their headquarters in Yokohama within days. General MacArthur, Supreme Commander for the Allied powers, arrived with thousands of troops. We waited for mass arrests, for executions, for the revenge we'd been promised they would take. Instead, they started handing out food. September 5th, 1945. The distribution center. I took Hiroshi to the municipal building that had been converted into a relief center. The line stretched for blocks. Thousands of people, mostly women, children, and elderly. The men were dead or imprisoned, or still making their way back from battlefields across Asia. American soldiers managed the line. They didn't shove, didn't strike anyone who got out of order, just directed traffic, patient and efficient. When we reached the front, a young soldier, maybe 20, with kind eyes and terrible Japanese pronunciation, handed me a bag of rice. 5 pounds. More than our weekly ration for the past year. For your family, he said, mangling the words. Kazoku no tam ni. Then a can of condensed milk. Dried fish. Something called Spam in a tin. A loaf of white bread wrapped in wax paper. This is all for us? I asked. He nodded, already helping the next person. I carried the bag home like it was made of gold. Hiroshi walked beside me, eyes wide, asking questions I couldn't answer. Mama, why are the Americans giving us food? I don't know. Teacher said Americans were bad, but they're being nice. I know. Were the teachers lying? I stopped walking. Looked down at my son, his too thin face, his confused eyes. 6 years old, and already learning that everything he'd been taught might be false. Yes, I said finally. I think they were lying. September 10th, 1945. Fumiko-san went to the free medical clinic. I accompanied her, expecting the worst. Minimal care, dismissive treatment. Maybe just enough to say they'd tried. An American military doctor examined her leg. A woman. A female doctor. Something I'd never seen in Japan. She was gentle, thorough, explaining everything in halting Japanese with the help of a Nisei translator. The fracture healed badly, the doctor said. She's been in pain for months? Since May. The air raid. The doctor's expression tightened. I can't re-break and reset it now. That would be too dangerous at her age. But I can provide pain medication and a proper cane. She wrote something on a form. She should return weekly for monitoring. How much? I asked. No charge. Medical care for civilians is free during occupation. Free? Yes, ma'am. They gave Fumiko-san a cane, a month's supply of aspirin, and an appointment card for the following week. We walked home slowly, both of us silent, trying to process what was happening. My son died at Iwo Jima, Fumiko-san said quietly. Takeshi, your husband. He killed Americans. Japanese soldiers killed American soldiers. American bombs killed Japanese civilians. She leaned heavily on her new cane. And now they give us food and medicine. Yes, I don't understand this war, she said. I don't understand anything anymore. Neither do I, Fumiko-san. But I was beginning to understand something else. That maybe the world was more complicated than propaganda had taught us. That enemies could become something else when the shooting stopped. That mercy was possible even after terrible violence. September 15th, 1945. The American officer returned. Same man who'd done the census. I'd learned his name was Captain Morrison. He came with 2 enlisted men and a truck. I thought, this is it. They've changed their minds. We're being relocated. Instead, they unloaded building materials. Mrs. Tanaka, Captain Morrison said, we're repairing damaged homes in this district. Yours sustained fire damage to the west wall and roof. We'd like to fix it before winter. I stared at the lumber, the tools, the Americans preparing to repair my house. Why? I asked. Again, that same question. Always why? Because it's damaged, he said, as if it were obvious. And because winter is coming. But we were your enemy. Captain Morrison set down a toolbox and looked at me directly. Mrs. Tanaka, do you know what I did before the war? I shook head. I was a carpenter, in Oregon. I built houses. He picked up a hammer, tested its weight. I spent 4 years destroying things. Now I'd like to build them again. They worked all day. Replaced burned boards. Patched the roof. Fixed a window frame that had warped in the heat. They didn't ask for payment. Didn't demand anything in return. Hiroshi watched, fascinated. At one point, Captain Morrison let him hold a hammer, showed him how to drive a nail. My son, whose father had died fighting Americans, learning carpentry from an American soldier. When they finished, Captain Morrison bowed slightly. A clumsy American attempt at a Japanese gesture, but genuine. Stay warm this winter, he said. After they left, I walked through my house touching the new boards, the solid roof, the repaired window, and I thought about Takeshi. My husband had died believing he was defending Japan from monsters. Had died thinking Americans would destroy everything we loved, enslave us, erase our culture. And here I was, alive in my repaired home, with food in my cupboard and medicine for my mother-in-law, because the monsters had chosen mercy over revenge. October 1st, 1945. I started teaching English classes. It began small, just neighborhood children whose mothers wanted them to learn the occupiers' language. I'd studied English in school before the war, when such things were still permitted. My pronunciation was terrible, but I could read and write basic sentences. Captain Morrison heard about the classes somehow. He showed up one evening with books. English primers, dictionaries, children's books in English. For your students, he said. If you're teaching them, you should have proper materials. I cannot pay. They're donations. From chaplains distributing surplus materials. He set the books down carefully. Mrs. Tanaka, may I ask you something? Yes, you're teaching children English. Helping them learn to communicate with us. But we killed your husband. There it was. The question hanging between us since that first day. Yes, I said. You did. Or someone wearing your uniform did. And we killed your soldiers too. We bombed Pearl Harbor. We fought you across the Pacific. We committed terrible acts in China, in the Philippines, everywhere we invaded. I took a breath. My husband died believing lies about you. He died thinking he was defending us from demons. And I nearly died believing the same lies, that you would slaughter us all. I gestured to the books. But you brought books. You repaired my house. You gave my child chocolate and my mother-in-law medicine. So, you teach English as… what? Gratitude? No, I said. I teach English because my son needs to survive in the world that comes after this war. And in that world, he will need to speak with Americans. He will need to see you as people, not as enemies or as conquerors, but as people. Captain Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then, my brother died at Okinawa. Your husband might have been one of the soldiers who killed him. The words hung in the air. I'm sorry, I whispered. So am I. He touched one of the English primers. My brother was 23. He wanted to be a teacher, like your husband. We stood in silence. Two people who should have been enemies, connected by loss and the strange mercy of survival. Captain Morrison, I said slowly, do you think enemies can become something else? He considered this. I think we have to try. Otherwise, this never ends. October 15th, 1945. More Americans arrived daily. Not just soldiers, but administrators, engineers, medical personnel, teachers. The occupation was becoming an institution, a government within our government. MacArthur issued reforms, women's suffrage, labor unions, land redistribution, things that would have been unthinkable under the militarists who'd led us into war. Some people celebrated. Others seethed with resentment at foreigners dictating our laws. I felt caught between worlds. The Americans weren't perfect. Some soldiers were cruel, took advantage, treated Japanese women badly. There were incidents, crimes, occupiers' arrogance. The military police dealt with it, mostly, but it happened. Yet overall, the occupation was nothing like we'd been promised. No mass executions, no enslavement, no eradication of Japanese culture. Instead, food distribution, medical care, rebuilding, democratic reforms, and a strange, uncomfortable process of former enemies learning to coexist. November 3rd, 1945, Culture Day. Captain Morrison invited me to a ceremony at the American base, a Thanksgiving celebration. An American holiday we didn't observe, but they were sharing it with Japanese civilians, tables laden with food, more food than I'd seen in years. Turkey, potatoes, bread, vegetables, pie. American soldiers serving Japanese civilians, smiling, trying out broken Japanese phrases. Hiroshi filled his plate, eyes huge. Fumiko-san sat at a table with other elderly Japanese, being served by young Americans who could barely pronounce their names. I watched it all and felt something break open in my chest. All the grief and confusion and anger and unexpected gratitude I'd been holding for 3 months. Captain Morrison found me. You okay? My husband died 9 months ago, I said. At Okinawa, fighting your soldiers. And now I'm eating Thanksgiving dinner with Americans who repaired my house. That's strange, isn't it? That's not the word I'd use. What word would you use? I thought about it. Impossible. It should be impossible. After everything we did to each other, the bombs, the battles, the hatred, this should be impossible. But it's not, he said quietly. No, it's not. I watched Hiroshi laughing at something an American soldier said. Watched Fumiko-san accepting a second helping of mashed potatoes. Watched enemies sharing food and clumsy conversation. Why? After everything, why are you being kind to us? Captain Morrison was quiet for a long moment. You want the official answer? Or the real one? The real one. Because we're tired, he said simply. We're so tired of killing. We've been at war for 4 years, longer for some of us. We've lost friends, Brothers, fathers. We've bombed cities and watched people die and done things we'll never forget. He looked at the tables of people eating together. And now we have a choice. We can keep that cycle going. Punish you, make you suffer, plant the seeds for another war in 20 years. Or we can try something different. What something? Building instead of destroying. Mercy instead of revenge. He met my eyes. It's not perfect. It's messy and complicated, and there are still people on both sides who want blood. But maybe, we can break the cycle. Do you really believe that? I have to, he said. Otherwise, my brother died for nothing. December 1st, 1945. Winter came, not as harsh as we'd feared, but cold enough. The repairs to our house made the difference. We stayed warm, mostly, with the help of coal rations distributed by occupation authorities. Hiroshi was gaining weight. Fumiko-san's cough improved with proper medicine. Our neighborhood was slowly rebuilding. Not just structures, but community. People who'd been preparing to die were now making plans for next year, next decade. I kept teaching English. My classes grew. 30 students now, ranging from 6 to 60 years old, all trying to learn the language of our occupiers. Captain Morrison stopped by occasionally, bringing books, practicing his Japanese, teaching me better English. We never talked about the war directly. It sat between us, heavy and unspoken. But sometimes he'd mention his brother, or I'd mention Takeshi, and we'd acknowledge the ghosts we both carried. One evening, after class, he asked, Mrs. Tanaka, do you hate us? Americans? I considered lying, considered saying what he might want to hear. But we'd moved past that. Sometimes, I admitted, when I think about Takeshi, when I hear about incidents with soldiers and Japanese women, when I remember the bombs, the fire, the fear. I paused, but then I look at my son, healthy, because you gave us food. At my mother-in-law, walking without pain because of your medicine. At my house, warm, because you repaired it. That's not an answer. Yes, it is, I said. I contain both things. The grief and the gratitude. The anger and the appreciation. They don't cancel out. They coexist. He nodded slowly. That's honest. You asked for honesty. Do you think... He started, then stopped. Started again. Do you think your husband would understand? What you're doing? Teaching English? Accepting help from us? It was the question I'd been asking myself every night. No, I said finally. Takeshi died believing Americans were demons. He died afraid of what would happen to us if you won. If he could see this, me teaching your language, you repairing our house, his son eating American chocolate, he wouldn't understand. Does that make it wrong? No, I said. It makes it necessary. Because we're the ones who survived. And we have to build the world that comes next, even if the dead wouldn't understand it. Captain Morrison pulled out a photograph. His brother, young and smiling in an army uniform. James, 23. Died at Okinawa, April 20th, 1945, 3 weeks before Takeshi. Maybe they fought each other, I said quietly. Maybe. And now we're here, building instead of fighting. Yeah. He put the photo away. My mother asked me to punish you, all of you. Make Japan pay for James's death. He looked around my small classroom. But James wanted to be a teacher. He wouldn't want revenge. He'd want this. We sat in silence, 2 survivors trying to honor dead men who'd killed each other's countrymen. December 24th, 1945. Christmas Eve. Americans celebrated Christmas with enthusiasm that baffled most Japanese. Trees decorated with lights. Songs we didn't know. A fat man in red suit that seemed vaguely unsettling, but they shared it generously. Distributed gifts to Japanese children. Organized parties. Brought joy to a country that had forgotten what joy looked like. Captain Morrison brought Hiroshi a wooden toy truck he'd carved himself. Simple but beautiful. Wheels that actually turned. Hiroshi clutched it like treasure. Thank you, Captain-san. Morrison taught him how to say it in English. Thank you, Captain Morrison. Hiroshi practiced seriously. His face scrunched in concentration. Thank you, Captain Morrison. Close enough. That night, after Hiroshi fell asleep clutching his truck, Fumiko-san said, Next year will be different. Yes, we'll rebuild, move forward. Yes, your husband would be confused by all of this. I know. She touched my hand. But he would be glad you and Hiroshi survived. That's what matters. I wanted to believe that. Wanted to think Takeshi would understand that survival meant adapting, accepting help from former enemies, teaching our son the language of the occupiers. But I would never know. Takeshi was dead, killed by Americans, buried in an unmarked grave somewhere in Okinawa. All I had were choices. Cling to hatred and starve, or accept mercy and live. I chose life, even if it meant accepting chocolate from conquerors. Even if it meant my son playing with toys carved by men whose brothers had killed his father. Even if it meant living in a world my husband wouldn't recognize. December 31st, 1945, New Year's Eve, Japan had survived. Against all expectations, against all propaganda, against all our fears, we had survived. The Americans weren't monsters. They weren't demons. They were just people, tired, grieving, trying to build something instead of destroy something. And we were just people too. Trying to survive, trying to understand, trying to raise children in a world that made no sense but offered, for the first time in years, the possibility of peace. I wrote in my diary that night, "The war is over. We lost. We should have been destroyed. Instead, we are being rebuilt by our enemies. I don't understand it. I may never understand it. But I'm grateful. And I will teach my son that enemies can become something else, that mercy is possible, that the world can be more complicated and more kind than propaganda ever suggested. Takeshi, if you can hear me, forgive me for accepting help from the Americans. Forgive me for teaching Hiroshi English. Forgive me for not hating them the way I should. But our son is alive and healthy because of their mercy, and that has to matter more than pride. The new year comes tomorrow. A year of rebuilding, of learning, of trying to understand how to live with former enemies. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in years, I believe there is a future. Outside, I heard Americans singing, some song about old times and remembering. I didn't understand the words, but the melody was beautiful and sad. Hiroshi was asleep with his wooden truck. Fumiko-san was warm and comfortable, her leg no longer causing her agony. We had food for tomorrow. Our house was repaired. We had survived. And somehow, impossibly, we were being allowed to keep living. That's what I couldn't believe. Not just that we survived, but that they let us keep our homes, our dignity, our future. M for rice during the war, but we were alive. And for the first time in years, we believed we might stay that way. Hiroshi woke early, clutching his wooden truck. "Mama, can Captain-san teach me more English words today? It's New Year's Day, Musuko. The Americans are celebrating too, but I want to learn how to say thank you better. I said it wrong last time. 6 years old, and already understanding that the future required speaking the conqueror's language. Already seeing Americans not as demons, but as teachers. My son was adapting faster than I was. January 15th, 1946, Captain Morrison brought news. The occupation authorities were establishing a formal school system. English would be taught alongside Japanese. Democratic principles would be integrated into curriculum. Girls would attend the same classes as boys. "We need Japanese teachers who speak English," he said. "I recommended you." "Me? I barely speak. You speak well enough. And more importantly, you understand both worlds now." He set down paperwork. "It pays. Not much, but steady. And your son could attend for free. A job. A real job. Not just neighborhood classes for barter. Money, security, a future." "Why me?" I asked. "There must be others more qualified." "Because you've made a choice," Morrison said. "To move forward instead of staying stuck in the past. We need people like you to help rebuild." I looked at the paperwork. At Fumiko-san, who needed ongoing medical care. At Hiroshi, who needed education and food and clothes. At our repaired house that still needed so much work. I accept. February 1946. The school. Teaching in a formal classroom was different from neighborhood lessons. 35 students, ages 7 to 14, sitting at desks in a building the Americans had repaired. Books donated by occupation authorities. A blackboard. Chalk. Things that seemed impossibly normal. Half my students were war orphans. Their parents dead in bombings, battles, disease. They lived in orphanages run by a combination of Japanese charities and American aid organizations. These children had every reason to hate Americans, yet they sat in my classroom, eagerly learning English, because they understood something profound. The war was over, and survival meant adapting. One girl, Yuki, 9 years old, both parents dead at Hiroshima, raised her hand during a lesson. Tanaka-sensei, why do we have to learn their language? They won. Shouldn't they learn ours? It was a fair question. The kind adults whispered, but children asked aloud. Because, I said carefully, the world is bigger than Japan now. Because they are helping us rebuild. And we need to communicate. Because knowing English gives you opportunities you wouldn't have otherwise. But they killed my parents. The classroom went silent. Every child there had lost someone. Every one of them carried grief. Yes, I said. Americans killed many Japanese. The bombs, the fires, the battles. And Japanese killed many Americans. And Chinese. And Filipinos. And Koreans. The war killed millions of people, Yuki-chan. So why are they being nice now? I don't know, I admitted. Maybe because they're tired of killing. Maybe because they want to prevent another war. Maybe because some of them are good people trying to do good things. Can bad people do good things? Out of the mouths of children. Yes, I said. I think they can. And good people can do bad things. The war taught us that. I looked around the classroom. What matters now is what we choose. We can stay angry forever. Or we can learn and grow and build something new. Both are understandable. But only one has a future. Yuki thought about this. Then she picked up her pencil and practiced writing hello in English. Small acts of moving forward. Small choices toward survival instead of stagnation. April 1946. Fumiko-san's health improved dramatically with regular medical care. The American doctors were amazed she'd survived as long as she had with an untreated fracture and no proper medication. Your mother-in-law is tough, the nurse told me. A Japanese woman trained by American medical staff. She would have made it through anything. She had to, I said. We all did. The clinic had become a strange meeting place. Japanese and Americans working side by side, treating patients without regard for which side they'd fought on. I watched former enemies collaborate on surgeries, share techniques, teach each other. It wasn't perfect. There was awkwardness, miscommunication, occasional resentment, but it worked. One afternoon, I overheard 2 doctors talking. One American, one Japanese. The Japanese doctor had treated wounded soldiers during the war. The American had operated on casualties from Iwo Jima and Okinawa. They were discussing surgical techniques with the easy camaraderie of professionals who respected each other's expertise. Men who'd spent years trying to kill each other's countrymen, now saving lives together. June 1946. Captain Morrison's tour was ending. He'd be returning to Oregon, back to civilian life, back to carpentry, and a family that missed him. What will you do? I asked. Build houses. Try to forget the war. He smiled sadly. Though, I don't think I'll ever really forget. No, I agreed. We carry it. Mrs. Tanaka, Keiko, I want to thank you. For what? For helping me remember that people are people. That we're not defined by which uniform we wore or which flag we fought under. He looked around my classroom, at the English words on the blackboard, at the children learning. You could have hated us. Should have, probably. But you chose something else. I chose survival. You chose more than that. You chose to see us as human. You made that easy, I said. You repaired my house, fed my child, gave us medicine. How could I not see your humanity? Plenty of people still don't, on both sides. He was right. There were Japanese who seethed with resentment, who saw collaboration as betrayal, and Americans who wanted harsher punishment, who couldn't forgive Pearl Harbor or the atrocities in China and the Philippines. What do we tell them? I asked. The ones who can't move forward? I don't know. But I think we keep trying. Keep building instead of destroying. Keep choosing mercy over revenge. He pulled out a piece of paper, an address in Oregon. Write to me. Tell me how Hiroshi grows up, how Japan rebuilds. I want to know that this mattered. It mattered, I said. You mattered. September 1946, 1 year after surrender. Hiroshi started formal schooling. The new system, co-ed classes, democratic values, critical thinking, encouraged rather than rote memorization and unquestioning obedience. He came home excited about everything: science experiments, geography, stories from other countries. He'd made friends, children of farmers, merchants, even some children of former officers who'd returned from prison camps. "Mama," he said one evening, "Kenji-kun's father was a soldier. He fought at Saipan." "Oh, he's very sad. Kenji says his father has nightmares and doesn't talk much. Too many men came home like that, broken by what they'd seen and done." Japan was full of wounded souls trying to find their way in a transformed world. "Hiroshi," I said carefully, "your father was a soldier too. He died fighting Americans. Do you understand that?" "Yes." "Does that make you angry at Americans? At Captain Morrison? At your teachers?" He considered this with the seriousness children bring to important questions. "Papa died before I really knew him. I remember him a little, but not much." He fidgeted with his wooden truck. "Captain Morrison made this for me. He fixed our house. He's nice." "So you don't hate Americans? Should I?" It was the question that haunted every Japanese parent. Should we teach our children to hate? Should we pass on our resentment, our grief, our desire for revenge that could never be satisfied? Or should we let them grow up in a different world? "No," I said. "You shouldn't hate them. Your father wouldn't want that." It was a lie. Takeshi would have wanted exactly that. But Takeshi was dead, and Hiroshi was alive, and the living needed different lessons than the dead had learned. December 1946. The occupation was settling into routine. MacArthur's reforms continued: the new constitution, land redistribution, breaking up the zaibatsu monopolies, war crimes trials for major leaders. Some changes were welcome. Others felt imposed, foreign, uncomfortable. We were being remade in America's image, whether we wanted it or not. But we were also being fed, housed, rebuilt. American aid kept us from starving that winter. American medicine kept us from dying of preventable diseases. American engineers helped restore our infrastructure. It was a strange bargain. Surrender our sovereignty, accept their reforms, and in return, survive. Most of us took it. March 1947. I received my first letter from Captain Morrison. He'd made it home safely, returned to his wife and daughter, started building houses again. "Keiko," he wrote. We'd moved to first names before he left. "Oregon is beautiful, but feels wrong somehow. Like I'm the foreigner here, not in Japan. Does that make sense? I spent 2 years in your country, most of it trying not to die, and somehow it feels more real than home does. My daughter turned 5 while I was gone. She doesn't know me, calls me sir like I'm a stranger. Maybe I am. The war changed all of us, and you can't just come home and pretend it didn't happen. How is Hiroshi? Still learning English? Tell him I'm carving him a new truck, a bigger one. I'll send it when it's done. I think about Japan often. About you and Fumiko-san, and all the people I met. About how we were supposed to be enemies but ended up as, what? Not friends exactly, but something. Humans recognizing each other's humanity, maybe. Is that enough? I don't know. But it's more than I expected from war. I wrote back that night, telling him about Hiroshi's progress in school, about Fumiko-san's improved health, about Japan's slow transformation. You asked if recognizing each other's humanity is enough, I wrote. I think it has to be, because the alternative is another war in another generation. My son playing with trucks you carved, learning English from teachers you recommended, living in a house you repaired. That's how we break the cycle. Is it perfect? No. There's still resentment, still pain, still people who can't forgive. But we're trying. That has to count for something. July 1947. A package arrived from Oregon. The promised truck. Larger, more detailed, with moving parts and carved figures of a driver and passenger. Hiroshi's eyes went wide. From Captain Morrison? Yes, he remembered me. Of course he remembered you. My son ran his fingers over the carved wood, examining every detail. Mama, when I grow up, I want to build things like Captain Morrison. You want to be a carpenter? I want to make things that make people happy. Like this truck makes me happy. 7 years old, and already understanding that creation mattered more than destruction. 1948, 3 years after surrender. Japan was changing rapidly. Cities rebuilding. Economy slowly recovering. Democracy taking tentative root. Women voting for the first time in history. I cast my ballot with shaking hands, hardly believing it was real. The occupation was less visible now. Americans still present, still in authority, but integrated into daily life rather than a constant military presence. We'd adapted to each other. My English class had grown to 70 students across multiple sessions. I'd trained other teachers, Japanese women learning alongside their students. We were building an infrastructure of communication between our cultures. One day, a new American arrived at the school, a young lieutenant fresh from the States, full of idealism and awkward enthusiasm. "Mrs. Tanaka, I heard about your program. It's exactly what we need. Grassroots cultural exchange, building bridges, teaching understanding." He spoke too fast, too eagerly. "I'd like to volunteer. Help with pronunciation, cultural context, that kind of thing." He reminded me of Morrison in some ways. That same desire to build something good from the ashes of war. "What's your name, Lieutenant?" "James Patterson. But please, call me Jim. I want to do this right. Learn from you, not impose American ways." "Why?" I asked. "Why come to Japan? Why teach English to children of your former enemy?" He blinked, caught off guard. Then, because my older brother died at Guadalcanal, and before he shipped out, he made me promise something. "What?" "That if I ever got the chance, I'd make sure his death mattered. That I'd work for peace instead of revenge." Jim looked around the classroom. "This feels like keeping that promise. Your brother sounds wise." He was 22. Jim's voice cracked slightly. "Barely older than I am now. But yeah, he was wise. I thought about Takeshi, about Morrison's brother, about all the young men who died too soon. Lieutenant Patterson, Jim, you're welcome here. But understand, these children have lost parents, siblings, homes. Some will resent you. Some will struggle to see past the uniform. I know. And you'll make mistakes. Say the wrong thing. Accidentally offend someone. I know that too." "Good." I smiled. "Then let's get to work." 1949, 4 years after surrender. Fumiko-san died peacefully in her sleep, age 74. We held a proper funeral, small but dignified. Several Americans attended, including Jim Patterson and some medical staff who'd treated her. Jim approached me after the ceremony. "Mrs. Tanaka, I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you. She lived longer than we expected. The American medicine gave her 4 extra years. She was fortunate to have you caring for her." I was fortunate to have her. I looked at the simple grave marker. She saw so much change. The war, the defeat, the occupation. She adapted to all of it. She was remarkable. She was ordinary, I corrected. That's what makes it remarkable. An ordinary woman adapting to extraordinary circumstances. Most of us did that. On both sides. Jim was quiet for a moment. Then, my grandmother back home. She still calls Japanese people terrible names. Won't forgive Pearl Harbor. But she's never met any of you. Never seen what I've seen here. What have you seen? People. Just people. Trying to survive, raise children, rebuild lives. No different from Americans, really. We're not so different, I agreed. That's what the war tried to make us forget. 1950. 5 years after surrender. Hiroshi was 11 now, fluent in both Japanese and English, excelling in school. He talked about becoming an engineer, building bridges, literal and metaphorical. Korea exploded into war that summer. We watched nervously, wondering if Japan would be dragged back into conflict. American forces deployed from bases in Japan. Suddenly, the occupation had new purpose. Strategic positioning for a new war. Some Japanese saw opportunity. Others feared we'd become a permanent military outpost. I just worried about my son growing up in a world that couldn't stop fighting. "Mama," Hiroshi asked one evening, "will there always be wars?" "I don't know. Captain Morrison said wars happen because people forget we're all human." "Do you think that's true?" "Yes," I said. "I think it is. Then we have to keep reminding them, right? That's why you teach English, so people can talk to each other instead of fighting." 11 years old, and already wiser than most adults. 1951. 6 years after surrender. The Treaty of San Francisco was signed in September, formally ending the occupation. Japan would regain sovereignty in 1952. Americans would leave, mostly. Some bases would remain, but the occupation would end. I had complicated feelings. Relief that we'd govern ourselves again. Gratitude for the help we'd received. Anxiety about managing without American support. And something unexpected. Sadness at losing the daily contact with people who'd become colleagues, even friends. Jim Patterson was being reassigned. His tour complete. Heading home to California. "What will you do?" I asked. "College, then maybe teaching. I want to work in international education, help build connections between countries." He smiled. "You inspired that, you know. Watching you teach, watching how you bridge cultures. It made me believe in the possibility of understanding. I just taught English. You taught more than English. You taught that enemies can become neighbors. That's bigger than vocabulary." After he left, I found a letter on my desk. "Keiko, you changed my life. I came to Japan expecting to fulfill my brother's dying wish. I thought that meant being generous to defeated enemies. But you taught me something different. There are no enemies, just people separated by circumstance and propaganda. Thank you for that lesson. Thank you for showing me how to keep my brother's promise. Jim." April 28th, 1952. The occupation officially ends. 7 years since the war ended. 7 years of transformation. Political, economic, social, personal. Japan was independent again. Sovereign. Free to chart our own course. Yet irrevocably changed by those 7 years of American influence. Democracy had taken root. Imperfectly, but genuinely. Women voted, held office, spoke publicly. The economy was recovering faster than anyone predicted. Our cities were rebuilt, more modern than before, and thousands of Japanese spoke English, understood American culture, had relationships with former enemies. We were a different country, different people. Hiroshi was 12, preparing for middle school. He wanted to study in America someday, to learn how they build things, he said, and to thank them for helping us. Thank them for what specifically? For not destroying us when they could have, for fixing our house, for giving us food and medicine, for teaching us democracy. He looked at me seriously, for letting us keep our home. That phrase. The thing I still couldn't quite believe. We'd been enemies. We'd fought a brutal war. We'd bombed Pearl Harbor, committed atrocities across Asia, forced millions to suffer under our imperialism. We'd earned punishment, revenge, destruction. Instead, they'd let us keep our homes. 1955, 10 years after surrender. I received a letter from Morrison's daughter. He'd died the previous winter. Heart attack, sudden at 53. Too young, like too many men scarred by war. His daughter wrote, "Mrs. Tanaka, my father spoke often of you and Hiroshi. You were important to him. Proof that the war hadn't been futile, that enemies could become friends, that rebuilding was possible. He kept every letter you sent. Carved trucks for my brothers in the same style he'd carved for Hiroshi. Talked about Japan like it was a second home. He never fully came home from the war. Part of him stayed in Japan. But I think that part was the best part. The part that believed in building instead of destroying, in mercy instead of revenge. You helped him keep that part alive. Thank you for that. Thank you for being his friend when friendship was revolutionary. Thank you for showing him that humanity could survive war." I cried reading that letter. Cried for Morrison, for Takeshi, for all the men who died too young or carried war inside them until it killed them anyway. But I also felt grateful. Grateful that in the midst of horror, we'd found moments of grace. Connections that mattered. Choices that made a difference. 1960. 15 years after surrender. Hiroshi was accepted to study engineering at UCLA. My son would go to America, live among former enemies, learn in the country that had dropped atomic bombs on Japan. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Mama, they're not enemies anymore. Haven't been for 15 years. Some people hold grudges forever. That's their choice." He looked at me with eyes that held more wisdom than 17 years should contain. "You taught me different. You showed me that people can change, that nations can change, that war doesn't have to define us forever. I showed you that every day. Teaching English to former enemies, learning from Americans, accepting help, moving forward instead of staying stuck in the past. He smiled. You and Captain Morrison, you showed me what peace looks like. 1970. 25 years after surrender, Japan had transformed beyond recognition. Economic miracle, technology leader, one of the wealthiest nations on Earth. The rubble of 1945 felt like ancient history. Hiroshi had indeed become an engineer, building bridges in America, Asia, Europe. Married an American woman, gave me grandchildren who spoke both Japanese and English fluently. I was 53 now, still teaching, still building bridges in my own way. My students were children born after the war, who knew occupation only from stories, who saw Americans as allies rather than conquerors. One day, a former student returned. Yuki, the girl who'd asked why she had to learn the conqueror's language. She was 28 now, a translator for international conferences. Tanaka-sensei, she said, I never thanked you properly. For what? For teaching me English. But more, for teaching me that we didn't have to stay victims, that we could rebuild, move forward, become something new. You did that yourself. You showed me it was possible. You and the Americans who helped us. She smiled. My parents died at Hiroshima. I had every reason to hate. But you taught me that survival required something else. What? Choosing the future over the past. Hope over revenge. Building over destroying. That sounds like Captain Morrison. You talk about him in class. His grandmother's wisdom. Healed people heal people. I've thought about that for 20 years. She looked out the window at modern Tokyo. I think we're healing. Slowly. But it's happening. 1985, 40 years after surrender. I was 68. Finally retired from teaching. My classroom days over, but still involved in cultural exchange programs. Still writing letters to Americans I'd met during occupation years. Japan and America were close allies now. Trade partners, military partners, cultural partners. The idea that we'd been mortal enemies 40 years earlier seemed almost absurd to young people. But I remembered, would always remember, the terror of August 30th, 1945, the boots on cobblestones, the certain belief that we'd all be killed, and Morrison removing his shoes, sharing chocolate, repairing our house. That choice, to show mercy instead of revenge, had changed everything. 1995, 50 years after surrender. The 50th anniversary brought ceremonies, retrospectives, endless documentaries about the war and occupation. Japan and America held joint commemorations, acknowledging pain on both sides while celebrating 50 years of peace. I was invited to speak at a conference. Survivors and historians discussing the occupation's legacy. What did you learn? The moderator asked. From 7 years of occupation, I thought about all the easy answers. Democracy, women's rights, economic recovery. All true. But the deeper truth was simpler and harder. I learned that propaganda works both ways, I said. They told us Americans were demons. Americans were told we were subhuman fanatics. Both were lies designed to make killing easier. And the truth? The truth is we're all just people. Some good, some bad, most somewhere in between. And when the shooting stops, we have a choice. Keep the hate alive, or try something different. What did you choose? To let my enemy fix my house. To teach my son the conqueror's language. To accept that mercy was possible even after terrible violence. I paused. It wasn't easy. I had to choose it every day, but I chose it. Any regrets? Only one, I said. I regret that it took a war to teach me those lessons. I wish we could learn them without millions of people dying first. 2000. 55 years after surrender, Hiroshi brought his family to visit. American wife, 3 children who called me Oba-chan and barely spoke Japanese. My grandchildren were products of 2 worlds, comfortable in both, belonging fully to neither. The oldest, Emma, asked, Oba-chan, were you scared when the Americans came? Terrified. But they were nice, right? Eventually. But I didn't know that at first. I thought they'd kill us. Why would you think that? Because that's what we'd been told, and because we'd done terrible things in the war, and we expected punishment. Did they punish you? No. They fed us instead, fixed our house, gave us medicine, let us keep our home, Emma considered this. That was nice of them. Yes, I agreed. It was nice. And unexpected. And it changed everything. 2010. 65 years after surrender. I was 93, living in a nursing home, cared for by kind staff in a modern facility that would have been unimaginable in 1945. Hiroshi visited regularly, bringing grandchildren and now great-grandchildren. My family had grown, spread across continents, spoke multiple languages, lived in a world I couldn't have dreamed of in the rubble of 1945. One afternoon, a young American researcher visited. She was writing a dissertation about the occupation, interviewing survivors. Mrs. Tanaka, what do you want people to know about that time? I thought about Morrison, about Takeshi, about Fumiko-san and Hiroshi, and all the people who'd navigated those impossible years. I want them to know it was complicated, I said, that we were enemies who became neighbors, that mercy was possible even after horror, that people are capable of both terrible cruelty and unexpected kindness. What was the most important moment for you? The day Captain Morrison knocked on my door. That moment, when I had to choose between believing the propaganda or believing my own eyes. Between hate and hope, between the past and the future. What did you choose? I chose to open the door, to accept help, to teach English, to let my son learn from Americans, to believe that enemies could become something else. Did you make the right choice? I looked at the photos on my wall. Hiroshi in cap and gown at UCLA, his wedding to Sarah, my grandchildren at Disneyland and Mount Fuji. 3 generations thriving in a world built on choices made in 1945. Yes, I said. I made the right choice. April 15th, 2012. My last entry. I am 95 years old. Dying, the doctors say. Maybe weeks, maybe days. But I am not afraid. I have lived to see Japan transform from rubble to prosperity. I have seen enemies become allies. I have seen my son bridge 2 worlds. I have seen great-grandchildren who will never know war between our countries. All because in August 1945, an American captain chose to remove his shoes in my home, chose to give my son chocolate instead of taking revenge, chose mercy over hate, and I chose to accept it. That was the miracle of the occupation. Not the reforms or the reconstruction or the economic recovery, though those mattered. The miracle was simpler. We chose to see each other as human. Takeshi, my beloved husband, I hope you forgive me. I survived. I raised our son. I accepted help from Americans. I taught their language. I let our home be rebuilt by the men whose brothers you fought. But Hiroshi is alive. Our grandchildren are thriving. They live in a world without war between our countries. Isn't that what you died trying to protect? The future? Morrison, my unexpected friend. I hope you found peace. You showed me that soldiers could be carpenters, that enemies could be teachers, that war-weary men could choose creation over destruction. You let me keep my home. Not just the physical house, though that mattered, but my dignity, my hope, my future. I couldn't believe it then. Americans letting Japanese civilians keep their homes after everything we'd done. But you did, and that choice rippled forward through decades, through generations, through 2 nations learning to be partners instead of enemies. To everyone reading this someday, remember that we have choices. Even after terrible violence. Even when hate seems easier. Even when revenge feels justified. We can choose mercy. We can choose building over destroying. We can choose to see our enemies as human. It won't erase the past, won't bring back the dead, won't undo the horror. But it might, just might, create a future worth living in. That's what I learned from the occupation. That's what I pass on to you. Choose mercy. Choose building. Choose the future. And never forget that healed people heal people. Epilogue, 2015. Keiko Tanaka died peacefully on April 20, 2015, at age 98. Her funeral was attended by family from 3 continents, former students spanning 5 decades, and representatives from both the Japanese and American governments. Her son, Hiroshi, gave the eulogy. My mother survived a war, an occupation, and the complete transformation of her country. She lost her husband, her certainty, her entire world. But she gained something too. The understanding that enemies are just people we haven't learned to see yet. In August 1945, an American soldier knocked on our door. My mother could have refused him, could have clung to hate, could have taught me to despise the conquerors. Instead, she opened the door, accepted help, learned English, taught me that people matter more than politics, that mercy is possible even after horror, that the future doesn't have to repeat the past. She did this not because it was easy. It wasn't. Not because she didn't grieve. She did, every day. But because she chose survival over stagnation, hope over hate, building over destroying. That choice, repeated every day for 70 years, created this moment. Me standing here, an American citizen speaking at my Japanese mother's funeral, honoring a woman who bridged two worlds because an American captain offered her son chocolate. Small acts of mercy matter. Choosing humanity over hate matters. Opening doors instead of building walls matters. My mother's life proved that, and her legacy will continue through every person who chooses to see their enemies as human, who chooses mercy over revenge, who chooses to build instead of destroy. Healed people heal people. My mother learned that from Captain Morrison. She taught it to me. I'm teaching it to my children, and now we pass it to you. What will you choose? If this story moved you, if it changed how you think about enemies, forgiveness, and the choices we make after conflict, then subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that like button. But most importantly, leave a comment telling me what you learned. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because this isn't just history. It's a lesson for today. For every moment when we're tempted to choose hate over understanding, revenge over mercy, walls over bridges, Keiko Tanaka chose to open her door to an enemy. That choice created 70 years of peace, prosperity, and partnership between nations that had tried to destroy each other. What door will you open today? What mercy will you choose? What future will you build? Remember, healed people heal people. But first, you have to choose to heal. The choice is yours. Just like it was hers in August 1945. Choose wisely. This story is based on documented experiences of Japanese civilians during the American occupation, 1945-1952, including interviews with survivors, historical records from SCAP, Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, and verified accounts of reconstruction efforts. While Keiko Tanaka and Captain Morrison are composite characters, their experiences reflect thousands of real stories from that transformative period.